of the Mississippi, and placed General Halleck in command of the whole. Meanwhile, Halleck had ordered the victorious Union army at Fort Donelson to move forward to Savannah on the Tennessee River under the command of Grant, and, now that he had superior command, directed Buell to march all of his forces not required to defend Nashville as rapidly as possible to the same point. Halleck was still at St. Louis, and through the indecision of his further orders, through the slowness of Buell's march, and through the unexplained inattention of Grant, the Union armies narrowly escaped a serious disaster, which, however, the determined courage of the troops and subordinate officers turned into a most important victory. The golden opportunity, so earnestly pointed out by Halleck, while not entirely lost, was nevertheless seriously diminished by the hesitation and delay of the Union commanders to agree upon some plan of effective cooperation. When, at the fall of Fort Donelson, the Confederates retreated from Nashville toward Chattanooga, and from Columbus toward Jackson, a swift advance by the Tennessee River could have kept them separated. But as that open highway was not promptly followed in force, the flying Confederate detachments found abundant leisure to form a junction. Grant reached Savannah on the east bank of the Tennessee River about the middle of March, and in a few days began massing troops at Pittsburgh Landing, 6 miles further south, on the west bank of the Tennessee, still keeping his headquarters at Savannah to await the arrival of Buell and his army. During the next 2 weeks, he reported several times that the enemy was concentrating at Corinth, Mississippi, an important railroad crossing 20 miles from Pittsburgh Landing, the estimate of their number varying from 40 to 80,000. All this time his mind was so filled with an eager intention to begin a march upon Corinth, and a confidence that he could win a victory by a prompt attack, that he neglected the essential precaution of providing against an attack by the enemy, which, at the same time, was occupying the thoughts of the Confederate commander, General Johnston. General Grant was therefore greatly surprised on the morning of April 6, when he proceeded from Savannah to Pittsburgh Landing to learn the cause of a fierce cannonade. He found that the Confederate army, 40,000 strong, was making an unexpected and determined attack in force on the Union camp, whose 5 divisions numbered a total of about 33,000. The Union generals had made no provision against such an attack. No entrenchments had been thrown up, no plan or understanding arranged. A few preliminary picket skirmishes had, indeed, put the Union front on the alert, but the commanders of brigades and regiments were not prepared for the impetuous rush with which the 3 successive Confederate lines began the main battle. On their part, the enemy did not realize their hope of effecting a complete surprise, and the nature of the ground was so characterized by a network of local roads, alternating patches of woods and open fields, miry hollows and abrupt ravines, that the lines of conflict were quickly broken into short, disjointed movements that admitted of little or no combined or systematic direction. The effort of the Union officers was necessarily limited to a continuous resistance to the advance of the enemy from whatever direction it came. That of the Confederate leaders to the general purpose of forcing the Union lines away from Pittsburgh Landing so that they might destroy the Federal transports and thus cut off all means of retreat. In this effort, although during the whole of Sunday, April 6, the Union front had been forced back a mile and a half, the enemy had not entirely succeeded. About sunset, General Beauregard, who, by the death of General Johnston during the afternoon, succeeded to the Confederate command, gave orders to suspend the attack, in the firm expectation, however, that he would be able to complete his victory the next morning. But in this hope he was disappointed. During the day the vanguard of Buell's army had arrived on the opposite bank of the river. Before nightfall, one of his brigades was ferried across and deployed in front of the exultant enemy. During the night and early Monday morning, 3 superb divisions of Buell's army, about 20,000 fresh, well-drilled troops, were advanced to the front under Buell's own direction. And by 3 o'clock of that day, the two wings of the Union Army were once more in possession of all the ground that had been lost on the previous day, while the foiled and disorganized Confederates were in full retreat upon Corinth. The severity of the battle may be judged by the losses. In the Union Army, killed 1,754, wounded 8,408, missing 2,885. In the Confederate Army, killed 1,728, wounded 8,012, missing 954. Having comprehended the uncertainty of Buell's successful junction with Grant, Halleck must have received tidings of the final victory at Pittsburgh Landing with emotions of deep satisfaction. To this was now joined the further gratifying news that the enemy on the same momentous April 7 had surrendered Island No. 10, together with 6,000 or 7,000 Confederate troops, including 3 general officers, to the combined operations of General Pope and Flag Officer Foote. Full particulars of these two important victories did not reach Halleck for several days. Following previous suggestions, Pope and Foote promptly moved their gunboats and troops down the river to the next Confederate stronghold, Fort Pillow, where extensive fortifications aided by an overflow of the adjacent river banks indicated strong resistance and considerable delay. When all the conditions became more fully known, Halleck at length adopted the resolution, to which he had been strongly leaning for some time, to take the field himself. About April 10, he proceeded from St. Louis to Pittsburgh Landing, and on the 15th ordered Pope with his army to join him there, which the latter, having his troops already on transports, succeeded in accomplishing by April 22. Halleck immediately effected a new organization, combining the armies of the Tennessee, of the Ohio, and of the Mississippi into respectively his right wing, center, and left wing. He assumed command of the whole himself, and nominally made Grant second in command. Practically, however, he left Grant so little authority or work that the latter felt himself slighted, and asked to leave to proceed to another field of duty. It required but a few weeks to demonstrate that however high were Halleck's professional acquirements in other respects, he was totally unfit for a commander in the field. Grant had undoubtedly been careless in not providing against the enemy's attack at Pittsburgh Landing. Halleck, on the other extreme, was now doubly overcautious in his march upon Corinth. From first to last, his campaign resembled a siege. With over 100,000 men under his hand, he moved at a snail's pace, building roads and breastworks, and consuming more than a month in advancing a distance of 20 miles. During which period, Beauregard managed to collect about 50,000 effective Confederates and construct defensive fortifications with equal industry around Corinth. When, on May 29, Halleck was within assaulting distance of the rebel entrenchments, Beauregard had leisurely removed his sick and wounded, destroyed or carried away his stores, and that night finally evacuated the place, leaving Halleck to reap, practically, a barren victory. Nor were the general's plans and actions any more fruitful during the following 6 weeks. He wasted the time and energy of his soldiers multiplying useless fortifications about Corinth. He dispatched Buell's wing of the army on a march toward eastern Tennessee, but under such instructions and limitations that long before reaching its objective, it was met by a Confederate army under General Bragg, and forced into a retrograde movement which carried it back to Louisville. More deplorable, however, than either of these errors in judgment was Halleck's neglect to seize the opportune moment when, by a vigorous movement in cooperation with the brilliant naval victories under Flag Officer Farragut, commanding a formidable fleet of Union warships, he might have completed the overshadowing military task of opening the Mississippi River. End of chapter 19.